This programme was produced at and first aired on MPR, Manawatu People's Radio, with support from New Zealand On Air. Ka pai Irarangi Te Motu, MPR.
Kia ora and welcome to Reserved Recommendations, a show about problematic faves, great trash, difficult art, and our complex relationship with art and entertainment. My name's Hugh, I'm the host, and I'd like to put in a very mild content warning for this show as a whole. Sometimes our recommendations on this show are reserved just because the thing that we're discussing is in some way not good. But sometimes there are aspects to the art or artist that may be confronting for some people. Read the episode descriptions for more information and do be aware of your listening environment. Alright, welcome back to another episode of Reserved Recommendations. This time I am joined by Anton Angelo from Christchurch at the moment, yeah?
Well, Littleton, lovely to be here. Yeah.
Brilliant. I love Littleton. It's a neat place.
I do too. We have a hill in between us and Christchurch, and we like to call the other side Swamp Side.
Yeah, well, I mean, living currently in Palmy, which is referred to as the swamp, I get that. So the pitch of the show, if people somehow missed that when tuning in, is that we're talking about things that we love, but hesitate to give completely unreserved recommendations to strangers. And the thing you said you wanted to talk to me about was The Residents, and you recommended me the albums Third Reich and Roll and the commercial album. So I had listened to both of those. You can get them on Spotify if that's a thing that people do. It's deeply weird. I seem to recall a while ago, because we met through the access station in Dunedin, which was Hills AM at the time, and you recommended me some Residents, but told me to be careful about listening to them on headphones because they are a band who will do things with panning that can actually cause seasickness if you're not careful.
It's the 70s, and it's a time when we're playing with all sorts of things. I mean, old Hawkwind are playing with the brown note, and various other people are playing with all sorts of interesting octophonics and all sorts of good fun for expensive stereos. I think the Residents I do put a big caveat on, and I put the same caveat on Philip K. Dick. If you read too much, you just get a bit wiggy. And
yes, yeah. Philip K. Dick is kind of like he can almost get a bit kind of like science fiction novel meth-y. There's a rabbit hole that he wants you to go down with him, and if you go down it, then no. And again, there's a difference here, and there's an interesting difference actually. I think with Philip K. Dick is actually mad, and he is presenting Gormenghast or any of the other things. He's presenting the world as he sees it, and it is deeply paranoid and strange. The Residents, however, I think it's very knowing, and being knowing is part of the. And this is my reservation. This is my reservation about The Residents. It's incredibly pretentious, and there's no way around it. There's no way around saying that this stuff isn't designed and knowing and there to prick intellectual bubbles, and also just to wind people up. But it's done in such a way that. It's like those things, when someone takes an idea but just does it wholeheartedly and takes it to its logical extreme, yet they never lose their pop sensibility. Yeah, so, I mean, that's I guess, as good a place to start talking about the things you got me to listen to as anything, because the first of those two albums probably the one that we won't play anything from. We might play something from the commercial album later on.
Yeah.
The Third Reich and Roll, my reason for not playing things is just that the tracks are all like, there's, I think, 2 half-hour tracks, and that's the whole thing.
It is, and it's designed. It's funny because the two sides of the album. And this goes to the pretentiousness of it. Third Reich and Roll. Okay, this is mid 1970s, and the Second World War isn't that far away. You know, that's where their dads went, and to actually be prodding that particular thing. So one song is called "Hitler Was a Vegetarian," and has pictures of Hitler holding a carrot, and then lots of other pictures of Hitler wearing dresses. And so poking at all the different kinds of, is this in support, is this against? These are the people that Hitler would have put in a camp. This is what Hitler would have called deviant. And so there's no question that it's even though the video, we'll get to that in a second, but there's a sense that there's no sense that this is in any way supporting it, but it is using it as a what's the word I want? As a goad.
Yeah,
an intellectual goad.
It's like the punk guys who adopted bits of Nazi imagery without paying necessarily that much attention to which bits they were taking from where, but just because they knew that was a reliable way to piss people off.
That's a really interesting thing, because now I think about the timeline of it. Because I know that Sid and Johnny were just doing it to piss people off, and partly because Sid didn't know anything else, and partly because Johnny was an asshole, and Malcolm just thought it would make money, so that's all good. Where with the Residents, there's much more a sense of, and like I said, it's a knowing, it's an intellectually, there's thought behind it. It's not just there to piss people off. It's there to raise some kind of consciousness. And when we get to the commercial album, I think that's when the satirical part of it actually starts making a bit more polemical sense.
Yeah,
I'm going to use big words because, like, as I said, it is incredibly pretentious.
Oh no, that's quite right. I think it's interesting that you say satirical, because I did a little bit of kind of side reading as well, and my understanding
there's a rabbit hole as well.
Is that Third Reich and Roll was kind of deliberately constructed as a satirical or a provocative statement about the music industry as they saw it at the time.
Absolutely. So there's two sides to it. So there's the Hitler Was a Vegetarian, and the way they created it was they played a whole lot of records, played along with them, and then removed the original music. So it's like getting a piece of blue tack, ramming it against something, and leaving the blue tack image as the art. Now, the interesting thing about that is, what does that mean for copyright and fair use and all that kind of stuff, which I'm fascinated by, because as far as I know, there's never been an issue with that. But you can hear the shadows of all of these James Brown, biker pop songs, and there's a little bit of that makes me think of things like Kenneth Anger and Scorpio Rising, and using and subverting the kind of the macho nature of that, which I'm sure again is seen. Then there's the other side, which is, what's the name of the other side of it? It's the one, the video. If you look up Third Reich and Roll, it's the one that you actually get the video of, which has a film. They completely do the set out in newspapers, and then dress in newspaper suits, and with Ku Klux Klan style newspaper headdresses. And I think this is the start of them trying to be entirely anonymous. Like they're not wanting to present who they are. And this is one of the things about the Residents. Everyone knows who they are, but nobody knows. They've never actually publicly announced it. So it's been an anonymous band since the mid-70s. And with that, there's actually a lot more original music that comes into it. And it comes through people like Harry Patch. There's and God forbid I should ever run into another Gamelan, but it comes through that we're using the sounds and then generating the music on top of it rather than so found music. All of this was big in musicology and academic musicology, and still is. I mean, you wander into a music department these days and drop Harry Patch's name, and it's like mentioning. I'm just trying to think. Bourdieu in a sociology tea room, but it's with that. The aim of where they're trying to get to, because they're using visuals as well, I think is a bit more obvious. They're starting to talk about industrialization. They're starting to talk about, even though none of the words in that are, well, there are no words in it. I don't think there are anyway. I don't think there's actually any audio that's actually intelligible. But
No,
some of the music...
I don't know. I was going to say no. I think it's the other one, which the Hitler was a vegetarian, which is sort of an endless montage of pop songs from sort of 10 years before.
Yeah, and they're doing the same thing in the other one, but it's less obvious that's where the things coming from. So if you want to talk about firsts, people talk about very early mashups and very early. Sampling and then perversion of that sampling, but again, I'm sure people did it before then, but again, I just have to it sounds chaotic, but actually behind it all, like I said, there is that pop sensibility, and then they'll get you into a groove and then on purpose upend it and just make a few drenching noises.
Well, and they're doing, particularly with Hitler was a vegetarian, they're doing very competent versions of these songs, but kind of hitting them with hammers and bending them out of shape and mangling the vocals and things on purpose. And the thing it reminded me of is, have you heard of those guys, the Axis of Awesome? They did this thing about. So it's a kind of a showy party piece for this kind of nerdy folk type duo, where they point out that pop songs all use the same 4 chords, and so they just do this massive endless medley. And their point is just that these songs all have the same 4 chords, so if you can transpose them into the same key, you can play them end to end or on top of each other.
And a friend of mine used to do that by just playing Chuck Berry, and he just developed a generic Chuck Berry, and when he was playing Chuck Berry songs, he was just playing this piece of music that. Yeah, exactly. I get it.
Yeah, but I mean, the Residents are doing that, but at the same time, they're kind of saying something extra. They're saying these songs are all the same, and isn't that a bit creepy?
Yeah, and putting it into, and we have the phrase "uncanny valley" now, which I think is a really good one, because it describes the disturbing nature of it, and that disturbing nature is there intentionally, and it's there partly because it's freaking hilarious. All right, it's just funny, and it's kind of catchy because they're using those things, but it's there to have. I don't like to use the phrase "a tool for thinking with." So rather than actually saying anything, it's saying, right, okay, if we make our world and move it slightly sideways, what extra do you see? And I think it's probably a good time to talk about the commercial album, actually, because that's the point they make this obvious, and the anti-industrialization and anti-capitalist nature of there's no. I talk about things like anti-capitalist, and I throw those kind of terms around. There's absolutely nothing explicit that's what they're doing. There's nothing. It's like Beckett, and that Beckett's just odd and things are weird, and it's funny. In fact, Beckett's a really good analogy, actually, because the thing, when people asked Beckett what things meant, he said, well, just read the bloody play, it's all there. And if you take that kind of attitude towards it, it is pretty obvious what's going on. And it is with this as well. So they've done the same thing they did with Hitler as a Vegetarian. They took a whole lot of popular advertisements at the time, and then they either transposed the music backwards, or they riffed on it and took it out, and so the songs are all 30 seconds long.
I think they're like between 30 seconds and a minute and a half. I think they vary. Yeah,
and it shows an enormous, because they're using this, because they're the pool they're coming from, that they're sampling their music out of and representing, is designed to be as catchy and memorable and simple and hindbrain, blaring as possible. It means the whole thing's quite listenable. But again, you sit there, it's like a Philip K. Dick novel, you sit there and go, oh yeah, okay, right, I get that. And after an hour or two, I remember a friend of mine at school, when I was introduced to it, he said, I listened to the commercial album. He said, I listened to the whole thing, and then I threw up. And I thought, yeah. It is that kind of, it is very distancing. Absolutely.
I think, because you keep coming back to humour, and I think there's this strain, particularly in kind of countercultural, and maybe that's a thing we can talk about in a bit as well, is where these guys came from and how they ended up where they were. But particularly in kind of countercultural American music, there's this strong vein of pranksterism, like. The thing that the attitude, not necessarily the political point, but the attitude reminded me of was someone like Primus, where there'll be quite an absurd element to the lyrics, but it's it's dark and absurd, and it's presented with this quite aggressive musical style.
That's a very good point. I can imagine a Mad magazine floating through, or having influenced people's approaches to this, which was absurd, which was taking for those of you who have never had the joy of reading a Mad magazine, one of the absolutely adorable things they do is they will take a movie and then replay it, redraw the plot of the movie, but just put in lots of stupid jokes, and I think the best one is when they do Airplane, because Airplane is a lot of stupid jokes, and all of a sudden but it's very much in that American mold. You're quite right, of pranksterism and of utter disrespect, that you see coming through with, and again, if you want to talk about Tom Wolfe and Ken Kesey and all that kind of stuff, that's all happening at the same time, absolutely. And people like Robert Crumb, if we're going to talk about countercultural stuff, we have to throw him in there as well. So there's no sex in any of this, which is an interesting thing. I think that's, and when I talk about no sex, I think that gender is actually something that is being played with a lot within the music, and that gender's never specified, and it's also, and if it is, it's always somehow not perverted. It's somehow changed, but it's and it's not like the Monty Python one, which is not a Monty Python aspect to gender, which is they just didn't really know what women were, and so therefore their satirization around women is just so broad. It's out of a kind of almost adolescent.
The Pythons were kind of coming from the British music hall tradition as well, where there was, we've decided that some things are inherently funny, and one of those is a man in a dress. Therefore, if we put a man in a dress doing a thing, it will be funny as well as whatever else is going on.
Oh, but a cock and a frock is funny, and but that's exactly the kind of cheekiness and pranksterism that that they're using, but he is doing it from a slightly more, and I say he because there is one or two main players in the band, in terms in driving it intellectually. Interestingly enough, the coming back to that, the main guy is a graphic designer, so there's a lot of graphics involved. But his design agency was called POUR, P-O-U-R, No, K-N-O-W, Graphics. And so it's not like he's afraid of it. He's just not doing it for a reason, or yeah. So that I find really interesting as well. That because of course I can imagine that the advertising scene and the thing that they're satirizing and playing within the commercial album is deeply sexist, deeply admired in the generations before's stereotypes of gender and sex and race and class.
And again, to kind of draw lines between them and other people who are making maybe not as weird music, but music that comes from perhaps a psychically weird place. One of the things that you hear recurrently about the kind of psychedelic countercultural bands is that they were the first to be kind of really ugly. Like the Grateful Dead were a bunch of really homely looking blokes in their street clothes. Janis Joplin developed a kind of sex appeal, but it was very specific and unusual.
There's an elephant in the room here, which of course is Trout Mask Replica. And where the references go backwards and forwards to that. And I think it's important because to understand Beefheart is to understand the preparation that he would put into his music. That all of it may sound utterly chaotic, but that's for a reason. Now, I've never grasped that. I've listened to it a few times. It has just never. It's like Joyce. It just never made that impression that I wanted to go down there. Where these guys, and they're not all guys actually. It's where the Residents certainly grasped that attention. I mean, even the name, when I think about it, Trout Mask Replica, Captain Beefheart, these are things if you search them on the internet, you find them. If you look for The Residents, even in academic literature, it just gets swamped with false hits, which is the point, because it is to. I was looking up to see what who'd written a thesis and bits and pieces on it, just to see if anyone had, and there must be out there, but you can't find them because every time you look up, inverted commas, The Residents, it just doesn't. It finds so many false hits, which is perfect, and it's a gag that's still working today. I like that. Yeah. So you thought you had you suggested some of the music of playing some of the music on the show, or
yes, I think that's a good idea. Shall we play a song and then we'll continue this conversation? In fact, what we might do is we might play a song and then we might go to some station messages and come back after that.
It's a fine idea.
All right, so is there a particular one that you want to pick? Again, I think probably from the commercial album is a good call on account of the other ones are very long, as I said.
Absolutely, and I think we can leave that as an exercise to the listener to go and have a look at and work that one out. From the commercial album, honestly, it because they all do meld into one kind of. It's almost like an opera, in that it comes as a piece, even though there's short bits in the middle. So now I'll let you just grab something from there, but afterwards we can talk about some lyrics and bits and pieces then as well.
Excellent. All right, well, we'll do that now.
I found her crying in the morning, sitting in a chair. She was wrapping something up and wrapping it with care. I did not mean to hurt her when I fell asleep last night. I was just exhausted from the act of being polite. Yes, I was just exhausted from the act of being polite.
If you're a fan of NPR, listening to our podcasts and live stream has never been easier. Just search for accessmedia.nz on the App Store or Google Play and download the app with the kiwi fruit logo. Once you've got it, pick Manawatu People's Radio from the list of stations and go find your new favourite show. Support this show and others like it by giving a donation. For more information, go to www.mpr.nz/donate.
And we're back on Reserved Recommendations. I am talking today to the wonderful Anton Angelo about The Residents. You were saying you wanted to talk a bit about lyrics, which I guess is the kind of defining bit of the commercial album as opposed to Third Reich and Roll, because this is where they're writing lyrics.
Exactly, and from there on, the lyrics of The Residents become quite important. The poetry of it becomes quite important. Where previously they had just been looking at the music. But the interesting thing about for me, the interesting thing about the lyrics of the commercial album is like the music, and as we were saying before, so the music is referring to advertisements of the time, either by rewriting the music, by inverting, or somehow, and I like to use the word perverting here because it's a good one to describe it. Turning things upside down, playing them backwards, or even just riffing over the top of something and then taking out the original from it. The lyrics of it are really mundane. And sometimes they are absurd, like when he talks about they don't know who she was or why she died, but when they opened her purse, they found a snail inside. But that's very sad. I mean, it evokes a melancholy and a thing, but it is just that kind of silly and kind of funny at the end of it as well. But one of the ones that has always stayed with me is I'm sorry if I fell asleep last night, but I was just exhausted from the act of being polite. And for me, all of a sudden they're talking. They've started to move away from simple satire and simple melange, and moving to a place which I think is then explored from the rest of it, which is becomes a very personal thing about the person who's writing it. And from then on, as you look through the discography, you get it's really, really. What is the word for melancholy, but with an element of humour in it? There must be one.
Oh yeah, I can't think of it, but I know the thing that you're talking about. I mean, it's almost related to the kind of Moomin thing about this is clearly for children, and it's silly and it's humorous and they're going on grand adventures, but also it's quite sad.
Yeah, exactly. Or I mean, and sometimes also the overblowing of melancholy in a Smiths like. I was playing someone the other day. I was playing them the Smiths for the first time, and when you actually try and look at the lyrics again through new eyes, you realise how ludicrous they really, really are. But they still describe reality, And for those of us who have never really grown out of our adolescent phase.
I mean, it's a thing that I kind of call the Roy Orbison effect, because he was such a specific and intense performer that he could elevate what, if you read them on the page, are truly banal and strange lyrics to this kind of operatic height of kind of teenage psychodrama.
Yeah, and there is that time in everyone's life when all of a sudden, for some strange reason, maybe you've fallen in love or out of love, or all the pop songs are talking to you, and how very, very disconcerting. And I think that's, when I talk about that actually puts me back to The Residents, because that's that dislocation, that psychic thing of going, oh, we're somewhere else, which lets the by having that by using that with the music, all of a sudden the lyrics become more poignant and put to one side. So I saw The Residents in London in the Royal Albert Hall, not the Royal Albert Hall, in the Royal Festival, and which is a vast, venue. And the thing that blew me away was how much, and again, I shouldn't have been surprised, but how much work they put into their stage shows, how much work they put into, because everything is, when you listen to the music, as chaotic as it sounds, as weird as it sounds, there is a deep labour in getting it to that point, to where he wants it. Now, admittedly, in the more recent albums, things I think have become, I don't know. You know how it is. Only like the early stuff. No, it's not like that at all. It's more that I think that the Residents have become have found a voice that they really enjoy and they work well with, and so why not? And yes, they do push things forwards and that kind of thing, but there'll be nothing like having Hitler with a carrot on the front of an album that I think they'll want to pull off again, because that's what you do as a youngster.
So, I mean, this is perhaps because we're maybe approaching this a little bit backwards, but if people aren't familiar with The Residents, like who are they and where do they come from? Because they are a specific bit of that kind of expansion of musical experimentation in the sort of through the bit of the time that people call the 1960s, that starts about 1968.
That's exactly
what I
right.
mean.
That's exactly right. And so their first albums are coming out in the very early 70s, and the ones we've been talking about are mid 70s. So really, the reaction there, I mean, and they're in Southern California. And one of the great things is they love to create mythology, and one of the mythological things is a mentor. They talk about their mentor, and his name is N, just a capital N, Sonada, and obviously that refers to a place called Ensenada, where Captain Beefheart lives. But he's also talking about Harry Partch, and he's also talking about a whole lot of other things. So partly it's just funny talking about someone who doesn't exist. But at the same time, of course, being The Residents, there's a serious side to it as well, or a more serious side to it, which is, they do come from a place and a time. So it's, when I think about that and I place them in, prog rock, and that for those kinds of experimentations as well, it's not that, it becomes less surprising, I suppose. Well, what do you think? I mean, is that a...
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair assessment. I think that one way of thinking about The Residents is that you could take all of the energy that prog rockers put into becoming so virtuosic that they could play what it becomes kind of unlistenable, but they could play it really well, and playing it really well really impresses people who understand how well you're playing this thing. If you put that much energy into instead bending the practice of music making itself, so changing what creating a song actually is. And also, I think you've hit on something with the amount of care that goes into the stage show, because I think there's a really deliberate creation of a mythology, or if not, because mythology sounds like there's a really coherent narrative and you could like write a fantasy novel about it.
But we know as fanboys, we know that canon was just made up on the fly, right? So the classic image of the Residents is them in tails with eyeballs for heads and then top hats on the top of it. And one of them is wearing a skull. The three of them are wearing, and that's because one of the eyeballs was stolen out of a dressing room. All they could find was a skull, so it becomes canon, right? And so therefore Mr. Skull is, 30 years later I'm seeing him play something because that's the only thing they could. Anyway. So yes, you're quite right that there is mythology and things, but we also know that just is crafted out of thin air, which is wonderful. And
yeah. I mean, it is. I guess that what I'm alluding to really is that you could spend a lot of time getting really good at playing an 8-string bass so that you can do this with your hand while you're playing it. Or you could work really
for radio listeners, he was waving his hand in quite a virtuosic way,
making a sort of finger Ripley gesture, which looks very cool if you can do it when you're playing an instrument, but it sounds like you could get really good at that, or you could spend the same amount of time and energy trying to genuinely convince people that you were an alien from the planet Zog, and just committing to the bit and refusing to ever admit that you weren't an alien from the planet Zog. And that seems to be sort of the thing that the Residents are doing. Like the idea that they were aliens from the planet Zog or giant eyeballs or Mr. Skull might be made up on the fly, but once it's there, they commit to the bit.
Absolutely, and it's as knowing as David Bowie, right? But it's less. Where Bowie had the vision for what he knew the end was going to be, I think these guys are more interested in how they got there. Yeah, does that make sense?
I think that idea of being driven by the process as well, because I hadn't actually read the thing about them playing along with the original track and then discarding it, but that's a very that's a very kind of conceptually artistic thing to do. I'm reminded of a guy whose name I've completely forgotten, but I remember he had in the Dunedin Public Art Gallery, he had this series of sculptures, which I think were statues of himself, and they got smaller and smaller and smaller and more deformed, because what he did was or maybe it was larger and more deformed, but basically what he did is each time he made a sculpture, he used it to form a cast that he would then make the next sculpture with.
Nice.
So they would grow, but the proportion would get out and they would lose detail. And that reminds me, but it's very much kind of, I've decided on a process, I'm going to see what it generates.
And if you have a look at the videos and the graphics that they use, when you look about the mid-1970s, I think of, you think about the height of graphics as being things like the cover to The Dark Side of the Moon, which is just absolutely crystal clear in what it's trying to achieve. They're getting beautiful renditions of things. This is deliberately messy. There is, I mean, the things from Third Reich and Roll shot on film that I have a sneaking suspicion was probably rubbing through the mud. It's done with a vignette, which is something that they used to do in the 40s. They all the stuff that just makes it it applies a layer of organic to it that it belies how knowing and how now again, all of this that I'm talking about could be seen as criticisms. I mean, and as I said to begin with, it's deeply pretentious. It is very much comes from the who can do these things other than people who've got food to put on the table, right? This is an expensive and difficult process that these people are talented, and they're musicians who are putting their mind to making things that are, to quote my ex-wife, unlistenable. so how dare they in some ways, which is all part of the fun, but.
That kind of, I suspect, is part of the time and place they originated, though, as well. Because this is me falling back on reading things like the electric Kool-Aid acid test. But one of the things that caused the Haight-Ashbury to be the Haight-Ashbury was that bits of Southern California were incredibly low rent, so you could get away with living there, kind of scamming your way through a lot of life in a very low stakes way, and not have any real obligation to make money in a realistic sense.
In a fabulous furry freak brothers world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the fabulous furry freak brothers are a caricature, but they are talking about an actual kind of lifestyle that was sort of viable for a while.
Yeah. Especially when you're young. So I must admit, I tried to become a fan, and one of the interesting things for me personally about the Residents was that I was never a fan of anything. I knew about a lot of stuff, and I was surrounded by Whovians. I was surrounded by people who were into stuff before it was cool to be into stuff. And so I decided that, okay, here's something I quite like. I'm going to become a fan of the Residents. And what I found was there's a deep, deep well of stuff there. There's no question that it would be trivial to write a PhD talking about this stuff. But I just couldn't carry on with it. There was always something else over the hill that was just as interesting or took my distraction. And so for me, whenever I think about the Residents, I have a good collection of CDs and bits and pieces and memorabilia and a key ring. But I can't quite... It makes me a little bit sad when I see them, because it's of a time when I thought I will wholeheartedly give myself over to this. And so I suppose when you asked with the theme of this program, part of that was, yeah, but I'm not a fan. And that's, I think, because I can't be of any one thing,
I mean, I think that kind of, because I have a similar experience. I'm into an awful lot of things, but I'm a very committed fan of very few, and with the kind of rise of fan communities and things on Facebook, I've joined a couple because a couple of them are quite interesting. There's a very, very nerdy, incredible string band fan group on Facebook where one of the original members, not original. So this is getting into psych folk nerdiness, but it's the core of the band is a duo. And then they both brought their girlfriends in, which brought them up to a 4-piece. And which
is bad for a band or a Dungeons and Dragons crew.
Oh yeah, it was in many ways a tremendously bad idea. One of many, including Scientology, that they went through. But one of the girlfriends who were the kind of first iteration of additions to the band actually contributes to the group from time to time, which is cool because she's utterly lovely. She was the Lady Mayor of Aberystwyth for a while and is now writing a book about what it was like to abscond from her parents' house in her mum's dressing gown because it was the hippiest thing that she could find. Anyway, I kind of got into these things because I thought, oh, these people are quite interesting, but then... the thing that alarmed me is the extent to which even within peace, love, and everything's wonderful communities, there's this vein of like, I'm a better fan than you. That's always present, and I can't handle that.
And also the people I most admire, if I had heroes, are people like Alan Moore, who I would love to have a beer with, but I think you'd get on my tits after a certain period of time.
Yeah, I think so. And I think actually Alan Moore is another really good kind of reference point for the Residents, because he's another person who made a decision at some point in his life to just pick a bit and commit to it utterly.
Yes. Yes.
And it's worked out very well for him. That's great. It's incredibly pretentious. And
no question about that. But yet, because of his wholehearted devotion to it, somehow there is a purity and a that kind of transcends that to some extent. You can forgive it.
I think that's it. I think at that point when and I mean the Incredible String Band are another example, because very pretentious, very strange, but when people are sufficiently wholehearted in their commitment to what they're trying to do, that does turn the pretentiousness almost more into a feature than a bug, if you can get on their wavelength.
Yeah. I heard someone talking the other day about difficult people and how difficult people make everyone around them uneasy, but they work hard to get around it. So when you're working with Bowie, you're working with David. Oh my God, I'm working with David Bowie. And so everyone's freaked out. And that makes them work just that much harder to do things they might never have achieved. So it's a really interesting dynamic when you have that, and maybe just the uneasiness and the difficulty of the residents is part of that dynamic as well. Yeah,
I think so, and I think it's almost what is it? I'm having a thought that I'm having difficulty expressing, oddly enough, talking about the residents. It's like
I said, you spend too much time down here, mate. It'll just drive you wiggy.
It's like knowing that it's going to be difficult is almost like a ticket price. You know,
but this isn't Stockhausen. You know, we're not pushing a piano. Well, they may have pushed a piano down the stairs. I wouldn't have put it past them. But they'd have only used a couple of tones out of it. And, yeah.
No, I get that. I guess what I'm saying is because they're straightforwardly... They're not hiding how weird they are at all.
No.
And so because...
Without doing a Marilyn Manson on it.
No, quite. But because you're signing up for giant eyeballs wearing top hats, except that one of them is a skull for reasons that are never explained, you can kind of meet them halfway on some other stuff.
It's exactly right. And also, it has to be said, the pop sensibility never went away. Went away. And that I think is a really important thread within the whole thing. That yes, they are, you know, from a commercial radio perspective, unlistenable. You would never hear this on the breeze, but you could.
I mean, that would be a fantastic April Fool's joke. It's just for the breeze to do an all residents playlist up until 12 noon when you're not allowed to do the jokes anymore.
The thing is, I thought, you know, the other thought about someone else whom I'm very enamoured of and have done specialist shows and bits and pieces is Nick Drake, and I was thinking, they could do a Nick Drake thing, and I thought, yeah, but they just all think he was, you know, someone who just left Arctic Monkeys or something. I don't know.
No, I mean, Nick Drake is another person who's kind of undeservedly obscure, but he was aiming for pop greatness and arguably should have got it. And like you say, if you played someone Nick Drake without explaining to them anything about Nick Drake, his music's kind of timeless.
Absolutely.
I don't think that people would go, what the hell is this and who the hell is this person in quite the same way.
So I think I've explained why I think that the residents belong in much the same way other people say that Trout Mask Replica belongs in a top, 20 albums thing, even though it's something that is monumentally, it can be monumentally difficult to understand or to come to grips with. I think that it's there for a reason. Yeah. So someone will have to explain BFAT to me.
I think the other thing that's worth mentioning about the residents, just as a kind of parting note, because we are close to out of time, is is that they are also just insanely prolific.
Yes. And they've just re-released frickin' everything.
So you're not only talking about, because Beefheart was somewhat prolific, but the Residents are almost like it almost suggests like a production line. The sheer amount of stuff that they have produced.
Well, and again, knowing that some of the people there are professional graphic designers, that's what you have. You have a pipeline. You have a pipeline of ideas and clients and product. And if you, as they have seemed to have done, create a studio that you can work through it, it's just something that you do. And it oh crikey, I'm going to feel sad about saying this, but if Chris Knox was still producing stuff, imagine how much he would have produced in the time since he became ill. It would be double. He would have doubled his output. Yeah, so very much in that kind of and that's a feeling I get as well. It's very much in that kind of barefoot, having a vision, but just workman-like, work person-like. Is there a non-gender specific work something like phrase? I'll have to look it up.
I don't know that there is, but I know what you mean, and I think the reason that I felt like it was worth mentioning the sheer amount of work is that one of the kind of things that we've been sort of circling around or addressing obliquely over and over again is kind of how much of this is a put on to deliberately annoy people, and obviously some of it, but I come back again to the commitment to the bit. Like you have, this is not a low effort troll.
And now when I think about things like when I start to think about things like the influence that they've had, for some reason the magnetic fields just leapt into mind, and 69 love songs, and anyone who has has looked at that idea of doing an enormous amount of or a large number of smaller works, you can't not think that the commercial album wasn't in some way a reference to that. And also anyone who is working in, I swear, anyone who comes out of a music school, they're going to have run into Parch and then found the Residents through it to see that the popular version of that.
Have you heard of the album Pan by Wendy House?
No.
So
Wendy House, I've heard the name.
So they're a New Zealand odd electronic-ish band where their initial gimmick was that the concept was they were making music from a post-apocalyptic future where all the real instruments were gone, so they had to use kids' toy instruments. That was their initial thing. They made an album called Pan, where I think there are two kind of core members of the band. And what they did was they agreed on a list of titles and lengths of songs, and then they both went away and recorded separate albums, which are both on the same disc, one in the left channel and one in the right channel, so that if your stereo has a balance control, you can decide which one you want to listen to, or you can listen to both, one in each ear. But it's that kind of commitment to process and the bit.
And also I will give them 1,000% credit for finishing that.
Well, exactly, because writing a song where your prompts are a length and a title specifically is a very strange challenge to set yourself as a musician.
And then again I start thinking about Frank. What was his last name?
Oh,
Frank
Sidebottom. Yeah.
Yes. Because that must fit in there somewhere as well. Because the head and I don't know where the links through that are.
No, if you haven't seen it, I'd recommend the movie Frank, which is about a sort of fictionalized version of him, with many liberties taken. But that was very interesting.
One would hope.
Yeah.
And that's that again, that's part of the deal as well.
All right, well, I think we are at time now. Thank you very much for talking today.
Thank you. I'd do anything for you.
If people have enjoyed hearing about the Residents, obviously we've mentioned a whole bunch of acts in passing. Is there anybody else who you'd plug in connection with the Residents if people heard that one track from the commercial album and went, this is my stuff?
Ronaldo and the Loaf.
Right.
Is Guava a Donut. Again, it's that incredibly odd, and anything on Ralph Records, really. I mean, let's say, we didn't talk about the publisher Ralph Records, who they've put out entire albums of covers of Louie Louie. They have just beyond excellent.
Cool. And a final question, do you have anything of yours that you want to plug on the way out?
Not at the moment. Not at the moment. Other than everyone should be absolutely outraged at the current state of scholarly publishing.
Right.
It is just a rort.
Now, I think you've actually written stuff about that, which people could probably find if they had a mind to.
I have. If people look up at tohatoha.org, I co-authored a report that's on that, and also the Council of University Librarians. I helped with their environmental scan for that. Those are two good places to start, actually, but I'd like to enormously recommend tohatoha.org as somewhere that has .nz that has an excellent set of campaigns on openness to knowledge and for everybody rather than keeping it behind subscriber paywalls.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Anton.
Thank you very much, Hugh.
You've been listening to Reserved Recommendations, a radio show and podcast from Manawatu People's Radio, Te Reo Irirangi o ngā tangata o Manawatu. The show is produced and presented by me, Hugh Dingwall, and I also composed our theme music. It's called Sack Jazz, and you can find it at wolfboy.bandcamp.com. You can find me on the internet at Objective Realty on Twitter, and you can find the show on Facebook under Reserved Recommendations. If you've got a reserved recommendation of your own, feel free to pitch it to me in either of those two places. And if you enjoyed the show, why not go ahead and recommend it to a friend? You can find past episodes at www.mpr.nz/show/reserved on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And remember, Manawatu People's Radio is a non-profit radio station. If you enjoy this or any of their other fine audio programming, why not fling them a couple of dollars? Go to mpr.nz/donate for more information.